Sophia worked at one of the best hospitals in the city. She was a surgeon, and it was her dream job. Her mother didn't like her choice of spending her life operating on human bodies, but saving lives was a noble mission. Sophia was a delicate and calm girl. She could have been a neurologist, an ophthalmologist, or a therapist, but she firmly said, "I don't want to operate on people." During her time at the hospital, she showed her best side, and the management had already entrusted her with a complicated surgery. Often, they would even call her in on weekends and holidays. "Dear, if you keep dedicating all your time to work, you'll never get married," her mother said. "A home isn't the main goal in life." Sophia replied, "You're crazy. You're a woman and you know women age faster. Time passes, the clock is ticking." Then let the clock take me," Sophia responded indifferently. The last time she had been in a relationship was in college. She was in love with a classmate, but he betrayed her with her best friend. Since then, Sophia had distanced herself from friends and kept her distance from them to avoid experiencing that pain again. But she was beautiful, blonde curls, porcelain white skin, and brown eyes. She was like a doll, but this doll had a heart of steel. Her profession was taking its toll. That night, Sophia had already left the hospital. It had been a long day, with 2 surgeries in the morning, and then she had operated on a man after a car accident for several hours. Now, his life was no longer in danger, but she was exhausted. She walked along the hospital park sidewalk and longed to go to her and her mother's apartment, take off her boots and coat, and go straight to the bathtub. There she would spend a whole hour in the snow-white bathtub, in a blackberry foam bath. Then she would go to bed and fall into a sweet sleep. Suddenly, she heard a heavy groan. Sophia stopped and looked around, perplexed. It was getting dark, and it was very cold that night. She shivered and looked toward the nearby bushes, from where the groan seemed to be coming. Who's there?" she asked loudly and boldly as she walked towards the large bush, turning on the flashlight on her phone. In the next moment, she saw a man lying in the bush. He was writhing in pain, gasping, trying to shout something, but all that came from his throat was an indistinct sound. Sophia approached and saw that he was a homeless man dressed in rags, with long dirty hair and a gray beard. The smell confirmed once again that he was a man who had hit rock bottom. "And maybe he's been drinking," as she thought doubtfully. But she immediately realized she was trying to find a reason not to get closer. She immediately felt ashamed. After all, she was a doctor, and it was clear that he needed medical help. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need any help?" she asked, sitting next to the homeless man. He looked at her with eyes full of pain and despair and only groaned again, clutching his stomach. "I'm a doctor." "Let me examine you," Sophia said gently, touching the poor man with her hand. The calm voice and kindness she had long forgotten made her freeze. Sophia placed her hand on the man's abdomen and pressed a few times. "He needs urgent surgery," as she said immediately. Sophia dialed the emergency room number of a hospital and requested the presence of doctors. "There's a patient in the park." The receptionist was surprised and replied, "But you need to call an ambulance from the municipal hospital. Our hospital doesn't accept this patient. It's an expensive and decent hospital." "And not patient," as Sophia said. "The man needs urgent surgery. He might not make it to another hospital. Send an ambulance here now." The receptionist couldn't disobey the doctor's commanding voice. Soon, the doctors rushed along the park path with the stretcher. When they saw the man, they were confused. "Sophia, are you sure we can take him to our hospital?" One of them questioned. "Are you suggesting we leave him here?" she said indignantly. "But he's a beggar, and we work in an expensive hospital," the paramedic commented. "First of all, he's a human being," Sophia replied. "Take him carefully and put him on a stretcher." The paramedics just shrugged and did as the doctor instructed. Everyone in the emergency room was also in shock. The nurses turned pale, even the janitors were shocked, and Derek, the on-call doctor, said he wouldn't perform the surgery. "I won't go near that beggar," he said. Yeah, I can do it alone, as Sophia stated, smiling and ordering the nurses, "Okay, girls. The municipal hospital will take care of this beggar soon," Derek said. And where are they going to take him? To another hospital, Sophia asked. They take everyone like him there, the man said. But it's over an hour away, and he will obviously worsen if he takes such a trip in this state. He might die on the way. Sophia said with a cold look, "So you think we should treat all beggars like this?" "Sophia, you're in a high-class hospital, where rich people and even millionaires come. He's dirty, smells, and could have some infection," said the on-call doctor, outraged. "A good cleaning of the operating room will fix all the problems," Sophia replied and rolled the beggar on a stretcher into the room. The nurses hesitated a bit but followed Sophia. They knew Sophia was right, but what would the chief doctor say? Mr. Edvaldo had already left, but he would find out later anyway. "Girls, I take full responsibility," Sophia said, seeing the doubt in the nurse's eyes. "Get him cleaned up, and I'll go to the operating room and prepare everything." The elderly anesthesiologist, Mr. Wilson, did not say a word. He was a man of old habits, like everyone else in the operating room. He appreciated Sophia's attitude and tried not to think about the chief doctor's reaction, but he had no doubt that Edvaldo would make a scene. The operation was successful, though with difficulties. "Sophia, you made the right decision. If he had been sent to another hospital, he would have already died," Mr. Wilson said to her. "Yes, that's exactly what I've been trying to tell everyone," Sophia felt. "But be ready to be reprimanded by Edvaldo. The anesthesiologist warned us, but why? Isn't Mr. Edvaldo human?" "I think he will understand," she said. First and foremost, he's a businessman. I mean, who's going to pay for this mess? He doesn't even have an ID, Mr. Wilson reminded her. Jesus, he'll be in our hospital for just a few days. Then we'll transfer him to the municipal hospital." She was very naive, but Sophia was sure that the chief doctor would understand her. She went back home. Only after midnight did she realize she had forgotten her bath. She just quickly washed her face, went to bed, and collapsed on the pillow, falling into a deep sleep. In the morning, a phone call woke her up. It was the chief doctor of the hospital, shouting on the phone that Sophia was causing economic conditions and violating regulations. What should I do now? Quarantine the hospital?" Mr. Edvaldo screamed. "I mean, we did all the tests, even a chest x-ray on that man. There's nothing wrong with him, he's healthy." Mr. Edvaldo, he would have died if we hadn't operated," Sophia replied calmly. But why do you care? Is he your father, brother, husband, or friend? That beggar is already dead to society. Such a man has no place in the world," said the chief doctor. Mr. Edvaldo, I'm sorry, but your reasoning isn't that of a doctor," Sophia tried to argue. Do you dare to speak like that to the chief doctor?" he yelled. "You're fired. We'll give you the termination papers, and you can forget your salary and labor rights, as they will cover the hospital's losses." What kind of losses?" Her hands trembled. Then the chief doctor hung up. Sophia was beside herself after the conversation. She didn't even notice the tears rolling down her face, she just stood by the window with tears streaming down her face. "Dear, are you crying?" Her mother approached her slowly. Who were you talking to?" "It was the chief doctor," Sophia said, wiping her tears. Mom, I was fired." Then, she told the whole story. Her mother listened and just shook her head. My God, what a difficult time we're living through. Does he think you did the wrong thing?" Mom, all that matters to people like Mr. Edvaldo is status and money. Human life has no value to him, Sophia replied. It's okay, dear. Don't worry. You did the right thing. I'm sure someone in heaven is watching everything that's happening. Everything will come back to you tenfold. Her mother hugged Sophia. I hope so, but I'm unemployed now. How are we going to survive? I'll look for a new job, but I think Mr. Edvaldo will make sure I'm blacklisted from hospitals. In that case, I won't be able to get a job at any hospital. Well, so what? You could be a pharmacist. I mean, they make good money, her mother said. Mom, only surgery. I'm used to saving lives, not selling medicine. But maybe you're right. Well, we'll see. Meanwhile, Mr. Edvaldo was already calling other hospitals and telling the chief doctors not to hire Sophia under any circumstances. Then, there was a knock on his office door. A worried assistant entered. Mr. Edvaldo, we have an inspection today, the secretary said nervously. I just received a call from my friend, she's a secretary at the Ministry of Health. She warned me that they are coming for an unscheduled inspection. I don't believe it, Mr. Edvaldo shouted. That's the last thing I need. Have they removed that beggar? Aren't we expecting an ambulance? The assistant replied, when will it arrive? The man was furious. He dialed the phone number of the head of the therapeutic department, yelled, and instructed him to remove the homeless man from the hospital. I don't care if you throw him under a bush. A Ministry of Health inspection is on the way, and the homeless man here isn't registered, hasn't been fully examined, and has no ID. Take him to the other side of the park and let the municipal hospital's ambulance take him from there. The chief doctor yelled, but it's cold outside. It's autumn. He replied, but it's not winter yet. You can cover him with a blanket, he advised the chief doctor. The nurses took a patient on a stretcher to the exit just as people from the Ministry of Health arrived at the entrance. They had already passed, but one man became interested and decided to follow them. Where exactly are you taking the patient? And where is the ambulance? Asked the inspector. It should be here by now, Mr. Edvaldo replied, smiling. We performed an emergency operation on the patient. It was successful, and now we're transferring him to another hospital for treatment. The Ministry of Health man turned and looked out the window. He saw that the ambulance had indeed stopped. He walked past the patient, but suddenly looked at his face and froze. Dad! The man exclaimed and ran to the stretcher. Is it you? Everyone looked confused. The man's colleague walked over to the stretcher too. Nathaniel, you must be mistaken, the colleague said. Then Nathaniel looked at the man on the stretcher and choked. Mr. Favio, is that you? The homeless man on the stretcher just looked at them confused, but kept his eyes on Nathaniel. They knew each other, however, something had happened that left the man confused. Now he couldn't remember where he knew that young man from, but the man had called him father. So he was his son. Dad, do you recognize me? Nathaniel looked at the familiar facial features and couldn't believe that his father, whom they had been searching for the last 2 years and had already lost hope of finding alive, was lying in front of him on a stretcher. He was thin, with a beard and hair grown almost to his shoulders. What happened over a year ago? Nathaniel asked. Mr. Favio had just celebrated his 16th retirement anniversary. He had a large medical equipment business and wanted his son to leave his position at the Ministry of Health and join the business. But Nathaniel was stubborn, saying he enjoyed his job and that business wasn't for him. This made Mr. Favio very sad. Who would manage the business then? He had a stepson who was a bit older, but Paolo was frivolous and would ruin everything very quickly. However, there was no choice. Mr. Favio signed a power of attorney for him and began to gradually teach the essentials to his stepson. Then, Mr. Favio was attacked. He was driving his car when another vehicle cut him off. Some thugs got out of the car and hit him on the head. He only remembered falling into the river along with the car. He managed to escape from the sinking car and then woke up on the shore. His head ached, and he could barely feel his arms and legs. Most importantly, he remembered nothing. 2 homeless men were warming themselves by a fire on the beach when Mr. Favio approached them. They saw an old man with a bloody head and offered to help. They wanted to accompany him home, but he couldn't remember where to go. The homeless men didn't want to go to the police with him, so they just took him in. That's how Mr. Favio became a homeless man with no memory and no past. The police informed Favio's relatives that they had found the car in the river but not the body. Since the current was strong, they could search for years and find nothing. Nathaniel didn't believe his father was dead and continued to search for him. Even though they were in the same city, they always walked down different streets and never encountered each other. Paolo, the stepson, quickly took over the company and began running the business his way. However, he managed it in such a way that the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Nathaniel was furious because his brother nearly drove their father's business to ruin. How would they tell their father when he came back? People don't come back to life after death, Paolo smiled, but Mr. Favio was back. Yes, it was him on the stretcher. Nathaniel immediately ordered that his father be taken to a room and ensured that he received the best care. No one would contradict him. The chief doctor was now taking orders on what to do and how to do it. Nathaniel had no idea where they had intended to take his father before. He had forgotten about that and was concerned with another thing, recovering his father's memory. It was clear he had amnesia, perhaps forever. But then he overheard two nurses talking. He was standing in the ward, and the nurses were chatting in the hallway. We were sure he was a beggar, one of them was saying. Mr. Edvaldo is doing his best to please him now, but he still fired Sophia. Why? She saved a human life, the other nurse replied. I feel so sorry for the girl. There are very few doctors as talented as Sophia. So maybe we should tell the man from the Ministry of Health. He should know who saved his father and who ended up being fired for it, suggested the nurse. Oh no. Mr. Edvaldo will punish us for that, said the colleague. Then Nathaniel appeared behind the door. Excuse me, ladies, but I overheard everything, he said bluntly. Tell me what really happened. The nurse was flushed and nervous. At first, she hesitated, but Nathaniel could fire them if he wanted to. Scared, they didn't keep any secrets. They told him how they found Nathaniel's father, how Sophia operated on him without listening to anyone's absurdities, and how the chief doctor screamed when he fired her. They also informed him that Mr. Edvaldo wanted to throw the patient out onto the street so that the Ministry of Health inspectors wouldn't see the homeless man without an ID in the hospital. After the trial, Paolo went to another city and had no further contact with the family. How could he? The chief doctor said, upon learning the details, how can a human being do something like this? His colleagues listened and just felt, but then they smiled. Mr. Edvaldo was not someone who had the right to speak about honor and morality. Later, there was an inspection at the hospital, and it was discovered that the chief doctor had embezzled state funds. All the state funds provided to the hospital had gone into Mr. Edvaldo's pockets. He was tried and ended up on probation. Now, he no longer speaks of honor and morality and was suspended from medical practice. Sophia still works as a surgeon, but now, after a day at work, she no longer rushes home to her mother. Instead, she goes on dates. Yes, she is dating Nathaniel, and they are about to get married. The man is a bit older than Sophia, but this age difference is nothing, as love knows no boundaries.